What's going on, guys? Today we are looking at Pittsburgh basketball, and I'm going to do this video a little bit differently than I've been doing the previous ones. I'm just going to address the bias in the room. I'm a Duke fan. This is a Duke basketball channel, and I'm looking at the other teams to profile from the perspective of a Duke fan, but also trying to do my research and do it as objectively as I can, but understand where my bias is coming from. And so we're going to try to do each of the ACC schools as we get close to the start of the season, and then maybe some of the other bigger schools as well, competition for the Blue Devils. But Pittsburgh, I think, is a good place to start. You've got Coach Jeff Capel, former Blue Devil. He's in his 7th season at Pittsburgh, and it's been, I wouldn't say a rocky road. That might be a little bit harsh, but it's been up and down at Pittsburgh, I would say is fair. 2 years ago, they did make the NCAA tournament. Last year, they just missed. And I think, NC State, there's Oregon, there's a couple other schools that were kind of bid stealers. And if that didn't happen, I thought Pittsburgh was on the bubble and had a chance to get in. They were 22-11 last season, 12-8, which was 4th in the ACC, and they went 1-1 in the ACC tournament. And it was a pretty solid year for them. Again, I think if those things don't happen, they have a good shot of making the NCAA tournament, and you look back at the season a little bit differently. But they didn't, and so you reflect on another missed tournament berth for Coach Capel, and you kind of wonder how long that's going to go on for. So let's go over the roster here. Who's gone, who's back, and who's new. Then I'll give you guys my projected lineup and rotation, followed by the schedule and my predictions for Pittsburgh this season. So, who's gone? Well, they lost some key players. They lost 4 rotation players, 3 major rotation players, and 2 of their best players. So, Blake Hinson, their leading scorer from last season. Listen, as a Duke fan, he killed us in the game at Duke. I thought he fully deserved to celebrate the way he did. He had 7 threes, and I think like 4 or 5 of them were heavily contested. Like, they were just ridiculous shots that Blake Hinson was hitting. And in that sense, he has got a little bit of J.R. Smith to his game. I use that J.R. Smith comparison with a few players, but I think Hinson deserves it in the sense that it's almost like an open shot is not a good shot for him, but a contested shot is an awesome shot for him. And he was just a phenomenal shooter for them. Then Carlton Bub Carrington is a lottery pick to the Wizards. He's a guy who's super talented. I think in a different draft year, he may have stuck around for his sophomore year, but because of the lack of talent, it made a lot of sense for him to leave and enter the draft. And good for him. He had a solid freshman season, started out really strong with a triple-double. Didn't quite necessarily live up to the triple-double hype, maybe, but still, really good freshman year, really good player for Pittsburgh last season. Federico transferred. He was a solid center for them, started most of the games. And William Jeffress is the last rotation player who left the program. Good rotational guy off the bench, could provide some defense and size from like the forward position. So a few guys, key players that are gone. Who's back? Well, my favorite player on last year's team for Pittsburgh was Jaland Lowe. And I really like him. I think he's a really steady guard. He has a good ability to change speeds, and he's got a good, when he gets it into like 3rd or 4th gear, he's pretty quick, he's fast. I thought he got better as the year went on, and we'll talk about his stats in a minute. Ishmael Leggett is back. He's a key guard who started most of the season, and then, or not most of the season, the first, let's say, half of the season. I believe he got injured, and that's when him and Lowe flipped. And Leggett was still really good for them coming off the bench. I expect him to be a key contributor for them this season. Guillermo Diaz-Graham is back. He's a nice shooting big man who came off the bench primarily last season. Zach Austin is a good wing defender. Wasn't a great shooter last season, but certainly a good defender who can rebound. And then Jorge Diaz-Graham, Guillermo's twin brother, is also back. He's a bit rotation player. it doesn't seem like Coach Capel fully trusts him, not nearly as much as he does his brother. And then lastly, in terms of players who are back, Papa Amadou Kante was their highest ranked recruit according to 24/7 Sports, including Jaland Lowe and Carlton Carrington last season. Unfortunately, he missed the entire year due to a knee injury. And I want to say this so it's not misleading. Him, Lowe, and Carrington were very similarly ranked on 24/7 Sports, so I would not be surprised if on ESPN that was not the order of things. So who's new? Damian Dunn is in from Houston, a 6'5 guard who had much better numbers at Temple before being a reserve player at Houston. Cam Corrin is in as a 6'9", 230-pound forward from Florida State. And then notable freshman commits on 24/7 Sports, Brandon Cummings, 6'3 guard, who's ranked inside the top 150. And Amdi Ndiaye, could have butchered that one, I apologize. 6'9", big, ranked just inside the top 250. So, how do I see the projected lineup and rotation shaken out for Pittsburgh this season? Well, I mentioned they lost 4 key rotation players. So there's guys that need to be replaced. I do think, though, there are a couple of clear starters, and that's the guards, Jaland Lowe and Ishmael Leggett. Lowe, in particular, I mentioned before, his numbers really improved in conference play, and I want to touch on that. Because, yeah, he did play more minutes, but he just was a better player as the year went on, which makes me... I'm really excited about his sophomore season. I think he's going to be really good. So he averaged 9.6 points, 3.3 assists, and 0.8 steals in the totality of last season. But if you just take the conference numbers, Lowe was at 12 points, 3.7 assists, and 1.1 steals. So I really think he's a guy who improved last season, and I think he's going to continue to do so this year. So you got those two guys at the guard spots. I think Zach Austin will continue to start on the wing. I think Guillermo Diaz-Graham steps in to be the starting center, and Cam Corrin will be at the power forward position. If you start Graham, I think you can get away with having a guy like Corrin not as the center spot, but the forward spot, being that he's a non-shooter. So I think that kind of provides some more lineup flexibility for them. Now, listen, losing Blake Hinson means that they lose a lot of three-point shooting from last year's team, and the guys they brought in don't necessarily replace that. So that is something that I'm going to be monitoring this season with Pittsburgh. I think guys off the bench in terms of rotation, Damian Dunn, Papa Amadou Kante, and Jorge Diaz-Graham. That's what I got. That's all. That's as far as I went. I just don't know enough about the other guys on the roster who either were on the team last year and got very limited minutes or were lower ranked freshmen who joined the team. It's hard for me to project them in the lineup and rotation. There's just a lot of unknowns as far as I can tell. Pittsburgh fans, let me know. But, as an outsider, I just see a lot of unknowns outside of Lowe, Leggett, Austin, Graham, Corrin, and Dunn. There's just a lot of I'm not so sure with the rest of the roster. Looking at the schedule, and I'll give you my prediction for this season for Pittsburgh. So, non-conference play. West Virginia, LSU. West Virginia will be a home game. Sorry, got ahead of myself here. West Virginia will be at home. They'll play LSU and then either UCF or Wisconsin in this tournament in West Virginia. They'll have a game on the road at Ohio State. And then as part of the ACC-SEC Challenge, they'll take on Mississippi State at Mississippi State. So they've got some tough games scheduled. 5, good name opponents. West Virginia may not be in the best of times as of late. You could argue the same with some of the other teams, but they still, good name programs. I think the appropriate level for a program like Pittsburgh right now. Conference play, home and away games, North Carolina, Syracuse, and Louisville. At home only, they'll have Boston College, Cal, Clemson, Georgia Tech, Miami, Stanford, and Virginia. So the California schools will come to Pittsburgh. And on the road, they'll take on Duke, Florida State, NC State, Notre Dame, SMU, Virginia Tech, and Wake Forest. So they'll have to go to Texas to play SMU. How do I see this shaking out for Pittsburgh? Well, look, I think I've kind of alluded to this. I think they didn't bring in the talent that they lost from last season. However, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be some addition by subtraction. With the ball more in Jaland Lowe's hands, I think he's a steadier guy. I think a little bit more reliable than Hinson or Carrington. But at the same time, those guys may have had higher highs, particularly Hinson with his shooting ability. It's just they didn't replace him. They didn't replace that level of shooter. So I got him going 8-3 non-conference, and I got him going 10-10 in conference play. And I gotta be honest, guys, I think if anything, I'm being a little optimistic. I think maybe this could be a little bit worse than that, just because I think there's a ton of pressure on Jaland Lowe to have an like 18.5 assist type year, which granted, I think he could certainly do. It's just where's the rest of the offense coming from outside of Leggett? Maybe Diaz-Graham can take a step forward. That would be great to see. But outside of that, maybe Damian Dunn is a 10 to 12 point scorer, right? So that's how you can that's how I'm talking myself into being more optimistic on this team. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you're new, please subscribe to the channel. We're doing college basketball, Duke focus, and then NBA draft. So if you're into basketball, this is the channel for you. Please like this video, share it with a friend. I'll see you guys next time. All that great YouTube stuff. Peace.